joy into this next part of our agenda, which is to talk about the extremely important work underway to build diversity, equity, and inclusion into the state system, in every aspect of the state system. I strongly believe that it starts at the top with the board and at the system level. And it's not that this has not been going on remarkably well at our campuses, but we all know that there is so much more that we need to do. And not only because, you know, we, first of all, we see incredible examples of women, right? And the importance of this work. But really, system design has to go hand in hand with every effort to make every aspect of our system and our campuses and our programs diverse and equitable and inclusive of all who come into our system, because that's the only way we're going to be able to meet our goals and make system redesign work. We need to grow. You know, you can look at this economically if you want to. This is a growth initiative. This is an ethical initiative. This is a democratic, with a little d, initiative. And we're at a point where we recognize how significant this is at the system level. It is not new to our institutions. Our institutions have been working for decades to make their campuses more inclusive and more diverse places, welcoming and supportive to all. But as I said, we know, that issues still exist. And until recently, we haven't been in a position to really leverage the power, again, of a system. That's what system redesign is all about, in order to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts really broadly and across the entire system. So Dan hired Dr. Denise Pearson as our first Vice Chancellor and Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer not too long ago. She has been, I think, August, maybe you came on board, Denise, correct me if I'm wrong, August or September. And really one of the first actions we took in October was establishing a board level commission on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And in a fairly short period of time, a tremendous amount of work has been done. And we're going to hear the report of that commission and discuss it right now on our agenda. So I'm going to turn it over to Jan Yeomans, our board member who has been leading the DEI Commission as its chair since we launched it in October. And she's going to offer her insights on the effort before Denise actually takes us through the work that's been done. So all I want to say to Jan before I turn it over to you, Jan, is that you were just the ideal person to be leading this. You have a combination of intelligence, business and worldly acumen, experience, expertise, and I think most importantly, compassion and heart. That is just a remarkable and a unique combination. You are completely no nonsense on one hand, which we need, and on the other hand, you are loving and embracing, and it's just you're a unique person. And so thank you for taking on this job and for taking it with the incredible seriousness and perseverance that you did. I don't know that I've ever reviewed so many documents in so short of a period of time. That's partly Denise's fault, but also largely due to you. So thank you so much for also just the amount of work, the profound amount of work that's come out of this in such a short period of time. And let me now ask you, Jan, to introduce the commission and the work of the commission for Denise.
Well, thank you. Pretty much left speechless after all that lead up there, but it honestly was quite an honor to be associated with this commission. I have to say we took very seriously our duty to define the board's role and responsibility in advancing DEI in the state system. It is way past time that we got some tangible results here. And I have to say that it was an honor to serve with such a really outstanding group of people. And I will say all the things in the world about the time, the energy, the talent that they put into it. But I think the most important thing is that their hearts and their minds were fully engaged. And that makes all the difference. Completely collaborative. Everybody had very, very valuable insights to offer. And it is a great group of people. Look forward to continuing to have them as board colleagues. I just learned so much about how terrific these people are. But I also want to thank everybody on the board because, you know, we asked you to do a survey. We've asked you for feedback. We've asked a lot of you along the way, and you've provided really useful, insightful input that was invaluable in guiding our work. And most of all, we really want to thank the students and the faculty, the staff and the university leaders who were also engaged in these discussions and who really offered us some incredibly deep and rich insights. But at the end of the day, we're here to serve them. And our ability to do that is really going to hinge on the willingness that we all are in this inclusively and that we have good leadership from the board on. So I'm proud of the work the commission has done so far. We have a long way to go in turning it into tangible action and demonstrable results, but we're on it. And the work that we did has really informed some of the strategy work that Dr. Pearson will share with us today. So I have talked enough. With that, I'd like to turn to Dr. Pearson and she can present some of the results and the plans for the future. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Chairwoman Shapiro, for giving me this opportunity to present PASSHE's DEI strategic framework. Serving as PASSHE's Vice Chancellor for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion continues to be a privilege, and I want to begin my presentation by expressing sincere thanks to Chancellor Greenstein, the Board's Commission on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, university presidents, campus chief diversity officers, and the DEI Board of Advisors for your generosity of time, energy, and expertise. This framework is what it is because what you gave, and students will be the ultimate beneficiaries of your investment in this process. Through the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, PASSHE has spent the past several months engaging with a wide range of internal and external stakeholders to develop this strategic 5-year plan. Please know that this is a framework. It is not the complete plan. Nonetheless, it will be used to create a fully developed strategic plan in the weeks and months to come, and I look forward to getting the work done. Next slide, please. To ensure that the state system and its universities meet the needs of all stakeholders, the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion worked with OGX to prepare this framework for the board's consideration. OGX is a minority-owned firm based in Denver, Colorado, and they have provided invaluable, responsive, and contextualized guidance for me throughout this process. So I want to extend a warm thanks to its CEO, Alvin McBurrow, and his team, especially Tori Copeland, for all that they have provided to this process. In the next few slides, I will present the strategic framework, starting with the approach we took. A large part of the work involved a board of advisors comprised of students, faculty, staff, and administrators. In addition, dozens of others were consulted and interviewed. The approach, specifically this framework, has positioned PASSHE to build, I think, a comprehensive and coordinated plan with aligned priorities, goals, and strategies that I will now share with you. Next slide, please. Here are the baseline questions the Board of Advisors at the very beginning posed. Where are we? Where should we be? And how will we know? After hours of dialogue and electronic exchanges of ideas, we have begun to answer those questions, having assessed our present state, refined our mission, vision, and values, and coalesced around key strategic priorities. We identified some foundational actions that must be taken, which I'll talk about in a moment. But there's much more work to be done in developing this plan, and I am hopeful that each of us will embrace the opportunity and demand more of ourselves as leaders, faculty, staff, students, and surrounding communities to become the best in class. Next slide, please. This is just a pictorial of the various inputs that went into the strategic framework. From the very beginning, the framework was developed in consultation, again, with students, faculty, staff, governors, trustees, and external community members. What's here important, I think, is that everyone's voice is and will continue to be represented in this work. Next slide, please. As previously mentioned, the board established a Commission on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in state-level governance during the October 2020 board meeting. The commission was comprised of Governor Cindy Shapira, Jan Yeomans, Dan Mazur, Stephen Washington, in addition to Secretary Ortega, Noe Ortega, President Aaron Walton, Trustee Harold Shields, Chancellor Dan Greenstein, and me. The commission's recommendations I will share with you now align with the charge we were given, and I am pleased to report that all components of the charge were achieved. I think we did the work we were asked to do, and we did it well, thanks to everyone. This is the slide. Okay, commission recommendations. Thank you, Randy. You're ahead of me, but that's good. It's not surprising that you're ahead of me again. Okay. It's okay. So here is an abbreviated version of the commission's recommendations. After conducting a board readiness survey, we drafted a statement of affirmation for the board's consideration, which I'll share with you in a moment. We also recommended a framework to review board policies through a DEI lens to create and maintain an equitable state system, with the overall goal being having an inclusive policy decision-making process by asking the right questions and focusing on equity in our process as well as our outcomes. We also recommended that the current accountability framework include a focus on DEI with specific and measurable goals, including the use of data from system-wide climate surveys. It was also recommended that the board be apprised of DEI challenges as well as opportunities, vet its actions for potential DEI impacts, and have a role in providing input on system-wide work. It was next recommended that the board identify, allocate, or reallocate resources to enable the system's DEI goals and objectives. Finally, it was recommended that the Chancellor maintain the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion to execute the strategic plan and advance system-wide efforts. Next slide, please. Here is the proposed statement of affirmation that I mentioned earlier for your consideration. In essence, without reading it, it is a values statement that requires commitment to thinking and doing in ways that foster increases in our compositional diversity, improves student outcomes, particularly for historically excluded groups, increases curricular and co-curricular diversity, and improves campus climate throughout the PASSHE system. This is what this is all about. And I look forward to any questions or input that you may have about the proposed statement of affirmation. Next slide, please. So this brings us to the DEI mission, vision, and value statement that will guide our work going forward. Next slide. This is our mission statement. It articulates the shared purpose that guides our collective efforts, and quite simply, it says PASSHE is committed to ensuring accessibility and championing the success of all members of its community, regardless of one's identity. Next slide, please. This is our vision statement. We endeavor not only to be a national model, but a global model for inclusive excellence and all that that means. Next slide. These are our values. We value accountability, respect, transparency, excellence, and involvement. And the descriptions are there for you to read if you haven't already, but all of this is in your packet of materials. Next slide, please. With clear mission, vision, and value statements, the Board of Advisors were able to work with me to identify strategic priorities, goals, SMART initiatives, and action steps, which are aligned with the priorities of major stakeholder groups, including the board, university presidents, students, faculty, and staff. Next slide, thanks. Our theory of action is pretty straightforward. We believe that if PASSHE remains mission-focused, develops appropriate outcomes-based strategies, partners with major stakeholders, and remains relatively nimble, then we will be able to create conditions that improve student outcomes for all students, thus enabling the state system to achieve its goals, supported by a coordinated and a comprehensive approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion. To that end, here are 5 strategic priorities we propose to pursue. Next slide. No, I'm sorry, you can stay there. So these are them: faculty, staff, and student diversity, equitable student outcomes, inclusive communities, curriculum diversity, and enabling infrastructure. I was so pleased when Jamie Phillips reached out to me and expressed his eagerness to work with me. And I just can't wait to get everybody on the same Zoom call, or maybe one day in the same room together, to really start collaborating to do the work, because students they're waiting for us. Next slide, please. I'm going to go through each of the 5 priorities, key SMART initiatives, which again are specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound, in addition to some foundational actions that need to occur. This first priority focuses on the compositional diversity of faculty, staff, and students. The selected initiatives focus on strategies specifically to increase this diversity. Next step, please. Next slide, please. To achieve this goal, here are some foundational actions that the board, executive leadership group, universities, and the Office of the Chancellor, DEI office specifically, need to take. What is important here for me is that it shines a light on the fact that, as Chairwoman Shapiro has said over and over again, this work cannot be done in a vacuum. We all have responsibility at the highest level of the PASSHE system. So if we want to increase compositional diversity, here are some things that we should consider doing. Again, I will not read them to you, but they are in your packet of materials. Next slide, please, Randy. The second priority focuses on student outcomes, and the goal is to eliminate persistent attainment gaps. The SMART initiative selected asks the state system and its universities to develop data-informed strategies to improve persistence and graduation rates for underrepresented minority students. Next slide, please. To that end, here are the foundational actions being proposed for the Executive Leadership Group, universities, Office of the Chancellor, Office of DEI. They emphasize evidence-based actions and reinforce accountability that Chancellor Greenstein, and as well as the board, continue to remind us of its importance. Next slide, please. The third priority focuses on campus climates with the goal of building and maintaining inclusive communities through 3 SMART initiatives: assessing the system-wide climate across all PASSHE campuses, strengthening the responses to discrimination, and establishing goals to improve system-wide climates. Next slide, please. Here again are the foundational actions thought to be necessary for the board, executive leadership group, and universities. There's a lot here, but I hope that you've had some time to take a look at it before this meeting, but if you haven't, please do so as soon as you can, because for us to think that, well, all too often we put these plans on paper and they sit on shelves and we think that they're going to magically turn into something, and they really can't unless we all take responsibility, as Dan has said over and over again, for our actions, wherever we sit within the PASSHE ecosystem. Next slide, please. Here are, that's okay. That's fine, Randy. This is just more. So if you notice, I divided it up. What are some of the actions the board can take? What are the actions that the ELG can take? What are some of the actions that the Office of the Chancellor should consider taking, as well as, some preliminary ideas of how reporting should occur. So you can go on. Thanks, Randy. The fourth priority focuses on curriculum diversity, one that I am really excited about. And the goal is to offer students a curriculum that reflects our human, societal, and intellectual diversity, which has an impact on the overall student experience. To this end, SMART initiatives involving establishing measurable goals to increase diversity in the programs and courses we offer, in addition to establishing strategies to enhance faculty professional development opportunities that support curriculum diversity and inclusive teaching practices. Next step, please. Next slide. I keep talking about steps. I don't know what's going on here, but next slide. Thanks, Randy. We're on the same page. The fourth priority, specific foundational actions to advance curriculum diversity are here. Again, there are responsibilities for the board, for the executive leadership group and universities, the Office of the Chancellor, and of course, what gets measured gets done. So we will make sure that appropriate reporting structures are in place. Next slide, please. The fifth and final strategy put forth in this framework focuses on an enabling infrastructure with the goal of ensuring the system and universities have the resources, incentives, strategies, and accountabilities in place to achieve diversity, equity, and inclusion. The SMART initiatives you see here address governance issues, accountability issues, and resource sharing and collaboration. Next slide. Thanks, Randy. Here are the foundational actions we believe are necessary to be successful in our efforts to build and maintain an enabling infrastructure. Again, their responsibilities lie heavily in the Office of the Chancellor. And, since the beginning of me joining PASSHE, we've been laser focused on having discussions about what will it take, to make sure, whatever comes out of our strategic planning activities we're able to deliver on it. So here are some foundational actions that I'm really excited about. And I think that if we adopt this way of thinking, we'll be able to make measurable progress in a very short order of time. I think we've already begun to make progress. Next slide, please. So, resources are important, and here are some of the foundational actions we believe are required to effectively resource DEI at the state system level. There is a role for the board. There's a role for the, our legislature, General Assembly, and, I am keen on and committed to having reporting structures in place so that it is clear that whatever resources we are afforded, they are stewarded in a responsible way and with key measures of our success. So really happy to share that with you, and again, look forward to your feedback. A full report, including recommendations, can be found beginning on page 19.28 in the packet of materials, along with a summary report of the policy subcommittee that was comprised of, again, President Walton, Trustee Shields, Governor Washington, and Molly Harris from the Office of Legal Counsel. Before I stop for questions, I just want to say that throughout the process of co-constructing this framework with all the major stakeholder groups, I kept wondering how a critical mass of historically excluded groups, students, faculty, and staff, and alumni, including those who never graduated, would respond to this framework. I kept thinking about all the graduates who could have benefited personally and professionally from greater faculty, staff, student, and curriculum diversity. And I kept coming back to the 1971 words of James Baldwin, who said, "You always tell me it takes time. It took my father's time, my mother's time, my uncle's time, my brother and my sister's time. How much time do you want for your progress?" End quote. Well, I believe this is PASSHE's time, and this strategic framework was presented with the confidence that if we seize this moment and demand as much of ourselves as we do of others, we will make measurable progress against inequities that have persisted too long in the Commonwealth state system of higher education and beyond. Thank you. I will take any questions you may have.
Yeah, and Jan, this is your commission, so you please feel free to lead this discussion too.
We have a question from Alex.
Okay.
Thanks, Dr. Pearson. It actually really is exciting for me as a student to see all that, because one of the major things that we deal with at that local level is really diversity, equity, and inclusion on a daily basis. And the hardest part here is like, well, there's all these barriers, there's all these restrictions. It's going to take a whole lot of work. And it's finally nice to see at this level, at the 10,000 foot level, the beginning of a real commitment. And so my question for you is, how do we as board members remain committed to this? What can we do ourselves to keep ourselves committed?
Well, if you go back to, for starters, to the strategic priorities, look how you can support and be advocates for those 5 priorities that I presented. The other thing, and first of all, Alex, thank you for your question. Really do appreciate it. The other thing that the board can do is to look forward to the presentations and the updates, I'll say, not presentation, but the updates that I will give at every board meeting, and to be present and come with an open mind and ask the hard questions, but also be prepared to be part of the solution to any challenges, that we may be facing. Again, the reason why your question is so important, Alex, is because, it starts at the top. And if the entire system, internal and external stakeholders see that the board is committed to doing this work, first of all, it makes my life easier. I feel supported, I feel empowered, but it's necessary. I just can't do the work alone, nor can faculty, staff, or students. So thank you for that question.
Next is Senator Schwenk.
Thank you, and thank you, Dr. Pearson. And Alex, if I may just say, your question was great. And I hear that as an endorsement of saying, this is something we've needed to do for a long, long time. And here you're seeing the results. And when I hear that from a student's voice, that means a lot to me. But my question specifically, Dr. Pearson and Jan, thank you for your efforts. We're now, we have a budget proposed. We've got, a new academic year coming up. Will we have the resources that we need to make the commitment to staffing this work, to making sure that, all the different parts are funded adequately so that we can meet our goals? And what can we do to make sure that that happens if there is a need to address this additionally in terms of the budget?
Dan, do you want to go first?
I can go.
I'm happy to. Yeah, thanks for that, Senator. So I think this is an important part of the, ask that we have made of the Commonwealth. To remind folks, we asked for a 2% increase and an unprecedented $100 million one-time investment in the state system. And a large chunk of that investment was to improve the experience that we offer in all the ways that are enumerated here. Ultimately, our work in this area needs to be, and largely is already, baked into the fabric of our ongoing budgets.
Right.
But this, and other members of the board will, and certainly the presidents will. The hardest money to find in a university or a college is the discretionary money that is required to basically start something new or to really energize something in a whole new way. So it's that seed money, that venture money, which is so critical and so difficult to come by. So just come back to the ask that I know is sitting before the General Assembly. That's vital for a whole bunch of reasons, including this one. Failing that, there are other, we will find the resources that we need. The board did take an action, I guess, at its last meeting, pension obligation bond, which provides us with some strategic opportunity funding. This is important. I guess the only other thing I would add is that, this is one of those areas where doing the right thing is also the financially sane thing, right? This is about our students who are stopping out in too great a number. And we need, for their sake, to do everything we can to ensure that they leave here with some form of credential that helps them along their way. And by doing that, by improving their outcomes, we're also improving our own position. So this startup funding is essential, and at the same time, we'll figure out what we need. And I hope the state can help us.
If I could,
Go ahead, Jan. Thank you.
I was just going to make a couple of comments. I think that one, a couple of goals that we had when we went into looking at this was transparency, to the extent that everybody sees that there is really strong commitment to making this reality at the board level. And Dr. Pearson is our eyes and ears on the ground. We need to have information about what people are thinking and doing, and what are the best practices and so on. I think the other thing that we talked about is accountability. Okay, we will not tolerate people who don't respect the values that we've set out here in terms of DEI. And finally, I would just say that, we really believe that we're maybe making something that's very special. And there might be some money available from outside foundations and others who share our concern. And we're going to explore that as well.
I appreciate hearing that. And for the rest of the board, that wasn't a setup question in terms of, gee, where's the money going to come from? We'll do that. I just feel that this is so important that we have to do what we have to in order to make sure that we get this funded, no matter what comes out of the budget process. Certainly, I hope it's favorable, of course. But I appreciate your comment, Governor Yeaman, that we'll look to foundations, we'll look to wherever we can in order to get the funding to make this happen. We've gone this far. We can't step backwards.
We have the commitment. We're not going to give up on it. I think the other thing to say is Chancellor Greenstein made the point that there is a financial aspect to this. If our underserved students feel like they are in a supportive environment, they will not have the dropout rate, the completion, they will stay at school, they will get their degrees, and that's incremental tuition. I mean, everybody who's run a business knows it's much easier to keep your customers than to have to go out and get new ones. So there's that aspect as well.
Thank you.
Senator Martin and then Cindy.
Thank you. A couple different questions I have. When you talk about the diversifying curriculum, is at a point is a cross section in the road where you also look at what the economy is asking for as well, to ensure that no matter what they're coming for, and they pick these courses that we've added in, are these still areas, are we still doing the research necessary to ensure that the end goal of these folks also entering into the workforce and a family sustaining job are also being met?
Absolutely, and thank you for that question. You know, oftentimes people do not fully understand what we mean when we say curriculum diversity. And the goal of curriculum diversity is to, in part, make sure that students see themselves represented in the curriculum. It's a way of affirming who they are as members of the academic community. And at its very basic terms, and then Jamie, please jump in there and help me because we've been talking about this as well. But very basically, it means, you know, if you take a physics course, and I can use physics as an example because I'll be speaking with a physics professor next week, and she's telling me about how she diversifies her curriculum. She brings in every class, she showcases a physicist from a historically excluded group from the community of color. Absent of doing that, students could leave her course thinking that the only people that contributed to the field of physics were were white people, right? And that's not affirmational. Another way of looking at diversifying the curriculum involves, you know, the types of courses or majors that you have. Are all of your majors, do you have majors in LGBTQ study, in Latino studies, Hispanic studies? You know, what do you offer your students to prepare them for a diverse world? So it doesn't have as much to do with the actual majors as how the majors themselves are presented to students and the different intellectual minds that are presented to them for consideration. Jamie, you want to pinch hit for me?
Yeah, it's not a zero-sum game. So when you're changing the curriculum, it's not as though you're somehow replacing curriculum with different curriculum, right? What you're trying to do is you're trying to provide more opportunities in terms of particularly things like minors and majors, where you're taking things that maybe you already do well, but you haven't put them together in a coherent fashion for students. Creating a Black Studies minor, for example, at a university that didn't exist before, where students are now going to be able to be immersed in an area of study that otherwise would have been excluded for them, but they've never realized it could be connected together. But also, just as Denise was talking about, it's at the level of the course, right? That I teach in philosophy, that when we teach philosophy, it's taught in a canonical fashion, that is, we teach the old dead white philosophers. And yet there's a lot of people who wrote philosophy besides those individuals. If I don't present those individuals, somebody can't connect up with that material. Not only do I have a problem in terms of just the language that they speak, that they're speaking something in a medieval dialect, they can't see themselves in what that person says, and they can't connect up with the material because of that. So it's a way to try to make sure that when we're teaching classes, we're doing so in a way that talks to the students that are in the room with us so that they actually get engaged with the material on a successful, on a course by course level. So it's a broad scale trying to change how we teach, what we teach, and the things that we offer to our students. But it's not taking away the opportunities for other students because of that.
And again, I want to stress, I've spoken to students about this, and the absence of a diverse curriculum is the absence of affirming their humanity. And that is in large part what this is about.
Thank you for that answer. The two other questions I have. First is, can you talk a little bit about the time needed, or what the training, the mandatory trainings would look like for the faculty on the campuses?
Yeah, thank you. So that training is already underway. We are using a company called Diversify to provide training in 3 areas that we evaluated and thought were important. The first one being on accommodating disabilities, the second one being on diversity, equity, and inclusion in the modern workplace, and the third module being on managing bias. Each one of these modules take less than 60 minutes to complete, and many of our campuses are well underway, some having completion rates above 50%, and we're getting very positive feedback, you know, from those faculty and staff who have taken it. It's a little bit different for the students. There is a module for students, and you know, the implementation is hasn't moved along as quickly, but there were some technical issues that needed to be solved. But many of our campuses are well underway with implementing the DEI training module for students as well. And again, getting positive feedback. I haven't heard anyone say this was a waste of my time. I've heard more people say we really needed this.
Just a side note on what you just said, in terms of the students, is that an elective they would take or is it a mandatory?
Yeah. So another great question. So, you know, we have 14 different campuses and this is the first time we've done it, and some campuses are doing it differently. So on many of our campuses, they are including it as part of their freshman orientation. So there it would be required. Some campuses I hear are thinking about integrating it into their freshman studies course. So it really varies from, you know, by campus to campus.
Okay, and my final question would be, who's ultimately responsible for the student outcomes in terms of the goals that you're setting? I mean, traditionally, and rightfully so, the president's responsible for the student outcomes. Who's responsible for this, or what kind of sway does the Office of the Chancellor have in trying to drive student outcomes versus what's traditionally the president's responsibility?
Well, the first thing I'll say, and then I'll, you know, punt it over, you know, to Dan, you know, by the Office of the Chancellor providing campuses with real-time data, you know, on student outcomes such as graduation rates and first-year persistent rates. And we're going to start looking at other things as well, you know, but we also have data on, you know, credit accumulation. You know, is it taking students of color 20 more credits to graduate than it is other students? We're going to just have to start having conversations around what the data is telling us. And Dan, I will let you talk about, you know, your accountability plans.
Yeah, so thanks, Denise. We're just going to fold this into our the kind of accountability structure that we've built since 2018. So, you know, the one where universities determine what their goals and strategies ought to be, and then, you know, we monitor progress using our accountability, our board of firm measures, all of which are use disaggregated data so that we can see differential impacts on students, also employer groups by race, ethnicity, et cetera. So we'll just factor it. It does not require a new set of structures. We'll just include it in what we have, and which is obviously very important.
The Council of Trustees also has to potentially be involved.
Yep. So as per usual, what would happen is that the universities will submit their comprehensive plans, we call them, in the fall, and those where they identify their sort of goals and strategies and budget needs over a multi-year period. Those are run through the Council of Trustees. I always look forward to having those conversations with presidents and trustee members about, you know, have you seen this? What do you think? How are you doing? We'll factor into presidential performance evaluation, obviously, because there's goals that are involved. So yeah, absolutely. The role of the councils in those processes has grown, and I think it's grown in a positive direction. I hear good feedback. I think from our councils and our presidents. I think it's really as much about, you know, giving visibility into the challenges as well as the opportunities, but also it creates a platform where we can do practice sharing. So if we're describing our strategies and goals to one another, right, the accountability to each other across the system is as important as the accountability to the chancellor and the board. Provides a platform for that sort of you know, our ability to share lessons learned.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Senator.
Cindy, I don't see any other hands raised right now.
Okay, because I can wait. Okay. Just very, very briefly, because I think great questions asked and great answers given. And obviously, you know, like everything else we're doing, we don't have all of the actions down to dotting the I's and crossing the T's right now. That evolves as the process evolves, and you know, the different action steps move forward, and there are a lot of them. And the only thing I want to quickly comment on with regard to resources. So first of all, I think DEI initiatives are so wrapped up in redesign and student success initiatives and faculty diversity initiatives and all the other stuff that we're trying to do that, you know, asking for quote, separate money. One of the things we don't want to do with this is make this a separate siloed effort. I think Denise has made that really, really clear, but I just want to reemphasize it. This is what we do. This isn't, you know, something we're just kind of adding on or thinking it's politically correct or anything like that. This is integral to what we're doing. And as Dan has said, the real goals are success for all of our students. And that success will result, you know, we believe, if you retain your customers, if we retain our students better and graduate them on a more timely basis, you know, thank you, Kaylin, you know, we will see revenue improving as well. So it's really all tied together. And I want to sort of emphasize to the board that that's the mindset that we have to have. We're not looking at anything in a silo. All of this is part of the same thing, and resources that quota for DEI are also going to be for student success, et cetera. That's the first thing. The second thing is somebody raised the point that, you know, I think there's a lot of possibility from the world of philanthropy for supporting initiatives. I think we already, you know, we'll hear from Cynthia, but I think that we already, you know, have funding to give emergency grants for students who otherwise might drop out, but for a $300 or $400 or $500 bursar bill. And we're pilot testing that, I think, we're going to pilot test that in the West. So that's all going to be, you know, part of seeing how this thing goes. So all these initiatives are tied together. So I don't really worry about resources because I don't think of it separately, number one, and number two, I do sort of think of it separately because I think there's a lot of foundation support for it. And then the only other, you know, big sort of issue that has come up that I would also just comment on in terms of curriculum, I think it's always scary for people to think about things changing like curriculum when we're so used to sort of a traditional idea of what that means. And I think, you know, Denise and Jamie, thank you so much, have explained really well, you know, how that actually evolves, you know, in a real sense. And there's nothing dramatic, and things don't get dropped in place of other things. It's an evolution. And, you know, so I just remind everyone that curriculum has constantly evolved in the history of American higher education, starting from that school Kaylin's going to go to, you know, which was the first college where the curriculum was theology, Greek, and Latin. And I think that's about it. And recitation was used for the first 100 years in colleges, right? Until and that is the history of American higher education. And it's at a point now where this is the next iteration in the history of American higher education. And we have to be part of it. It's more important for us to be part of it than private schools because we're the ones responsible for educating the citizens of the Commonwealth. So I just wanted to make those final comments, but it's a great discussion. Is there any other discussion? Because I do want to move this to motion. If not,
Just quickly say, you know, we really deliberately made the decision not to create a new standing committee of the board, but rather, to the point of this is what we do, incorporate DEI into the work that's already going on. So in a way, it's kind of like we finally got our prescription for our glasses updated. We're going to look at the world clearly now, and we are working with the same world, but we're going to behave differently as a result of what we can now see.
great. Thanks, Jan. Okay, I think at this point that I would like to entertain a motion that the Board of Governors hereby accepts the Commission's report, approves the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Statement of Affirmation, and affirms the direction of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Strategic Framework as presented. Can I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Is there any further discussion?
No hands raised.
Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Are there any opposed? All right, thank you very much. The motion carries. Appreciate it.